And if you haven't voted already, today is election day, so go vote before the polls close. And
if you're in line, they have to let you vote.
Yes.
There you go. They have to let
you can listen to this podcast while you are waiting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be a longer one, so it'll be perfect.
Yeah. I'm wearing blue for Democrats.
Me too.
Kelly's got her Get Political shirt on.
It says read, think, vote on the back.
Nice. Where did my phone go? I want to show you my voted sticker. Oh well. Okay.
All right, ready?
Ready.
Hi, I'm Julia.
I'm Rachel.
And I'm Kelly.
And this is What You Should Read,
the podcast where we should all over our books.
It's election day.
Oh, goodness.
If this episode just sounds like we are anxious and wound up, it's because we are.
Yep.
So we're gonna try to let off some steam and just talk about political books today.
Yes, and hopefully it will not make us more anxious, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, I am excited for the books that we're going to talk about today, and I'm excited to have our guest on a little bit later. But first, before we get into what we're reading this week, Rachel, you had what we're calling misprints, which is our segment where we correct something that was said in a previous episode or clarify. So what is your misprint this week?
Yes. So a couple of weeks ago, we did an episode with Dr. Nay about books to read by Black authors. And one of my recommendations was Get a Life, Chloe Brown, and the sequel, which was Take a Hint, Dani Brown. And then I talked about the third book that's coming out next year, which I accidentally said was called Act Your Age, Chloe Brown, which is not what it's called. It's called Act Your Age, Eve Brown. So that's the third one coming out next year. So be on the lookout for it. I'm really excited for Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert.
How dare you?
I know.
Oh, but while we're talking about her, there is a Kobo exclusive that she wrote coming out pretty soon, right?
Yeah, in a couple of weeks, I think. Yes, Christmassy romance. So I might break my book buying ban just for that because, Christmas.
I think you should.
Yeah.
You've been really good.
I have. It's been a full month, at least, without buying any books.
I think I've been buying all the books you would have bought. I think I'm just making up for it.
Cool. Thanks.
Same. I'm buying for me.
Yeah, it's like when Phoebe on Friends can't eat meat because she's pregnant and it disagrees with her, but she's a vegetarian and she's pregnant and she only wants to eat meat. That's what the baby wants, and she's really upset about it. So Joey offers to not eat meat for the rest of her pregnancy, which is a huge sacrifice because sandwiches.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that episode.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's jump right in. Kelly, let's start with you. What are you reading this week?
I am reading Or What You Will by Jo Walton, which was one of my my 5.
Wow, you're
doing really well.
Yeah.
I read 3 of the 5, so now I am Michael, very average, and this is 4.
You're gonna be a Janet. I can feel it.
I hope so, because as anyone who knows me can tell you, I will make a list with the best of intentions and I will not do anything on that list. But not this one time. This one time I am going to be a Janet. If it kills us all, I will be a Janet.
Relatable.
Are you liking the book so far?
I am. It's really good. I'm not that far in. So far, I've loved all of them. I was gonna say my favorite is Watch Over Me by Nina LaCour, which I just finished last night, but it might also be The Midnight Library. And Riot Baby was super good too. So I'm nailing it, really. Everything I've picked has been really good so far.
Good. Rachel, what are you reading this week?
Well, I'm still making my way through The Stand. It's a long book, and I haven't been reading that much. I don't know. I've just been more interested in watching movies and things. So I haven't been doing that much reading, but I also started The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson, which is about a religious cult and witches and magic. And it's really good so far. I'm liking it. I like the main character. And
Is it historical fiction?
no, it's like set in it's sort of based on like puritanical New England, but it's made up. It's not like based on anything true. It's just this like puritanical style religious cult, and the main character is a girl whose mother was supposed to marry the prophet, who is the leader of the cult. But then she fell in love with a boy of a different race who lived outside outside their town, and she got pregnant. And so she had a mixed daughter. And so so that's the main character. So her mother died in childbirth, I think. And her family did take her in, but they sort of lost their status in the community because of her. And so anyway, I'm just in the beginning still, so I don't know what's going to happen. I think she's going to get involved with some dark stuff.
Okay, I want to borrow that when you're
Yeah.
done.
You like it. Yeah.
I am really obsessed with The Vow on HBO. Have you heard of this?
I've heard of it. I haven't watched it yet.
It's really good.
Yeah, so.
It's the documentary series about Nexium, the professional development cult that was a cover for a sex trafficking ring.
Yeah.
It's wild. And so since we finished watching that just the other day, actually, I've also been listening to podcasts about it, and I cannot wait for all of the books that are going to be published by the survivors of this thing. Yeah. So really, really into cults right now. Not like into cults, but into reading about them and thinking about what prompts a person to get taken in by one.
Yeah.
Ooh, my favorite bit of nonsense trivia. So the phrase "drink the Kool-Aid" is of course about Jonestown,
Mhm.
but it wasn't Kool-Aid, it was Flavor Aid. So
Of course, went cheap on them.
The Kool-Aid company is like, come on. Well, I have a couple of books going right now. The first, I started it yesterday, and it's just what I need right now, just to take my mind off of all of the awfulness in the world. And it is Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade. It's so cute. It is so adorable. It's a modern romance, contemporary romance, and it's about the two main characters are Marcus, who is an actor in a Game of Thrones style show. He plays the kind of Jaime Lannister kind of character, so he's like the heartthrob, and his persona in real life as an actor or as a celebrity is kind of a vapid, frivolous guy, but secretly he's really smart, and he writes fan fiction about his own show because he really doesn't like the way the producers and the writers have gone with the direction. So he writes his own stories under a fake name. Love it. And then of course the woman in the story, she also writes fan fiction, and the two of them are best friends online and definitely have like a great connection. So somehow they end up meeting in real life. I won't go too much more into it because it's, right off the bat, so much happens. But so I think it's like a mistaken identity or unknown identity trope, which is fun. But one thing I really like about it is her job, the main character, April, her job is a geologist. And I just think that's so cool. Like, I just love it in books when people have jobs that I don't know much about. So I feel like I'm learning what a geologist actually does. That's really cool. She's really good at her job. And then she writes fan fiction in her spare time. So it's good. So then I'm also reading Toil and Trouble, which is one of my 5. and it's a collection of short stories about young women who are witches, and it's good. I've only read 3 stories so far, so I'm just like reading a story every now and again. And the first 2 stories, I was like, oh, I didn't really like them. I wasn't really into it, so I wasn't sure if I was going to like the whole thing. But then the third one, written by Tess Sharp, who's one of the editors on the collection as well, was really good. It was this queer love story about 2 young witches, and it's all about fate and who controls your fate or your destiny. And I thought it was really, really well done. So I'm going to happily keep reading it.
Nice.
Well, for the fourth week in a row, we have a whole bunch of book news. But for a really nice change, it's all good, or at least not bad. So first and most exciting, they have greenlit a season 2 of The Babysitter's Club.
Yay.
Yes, the entire cast and Rachel Schuchert, the showrunner, will be returning. We don't know yet what books they're going to adapt, but it will debut next year sometime. I'm hoping early, but probably not.
Maybe summer.
Eventually it's coming. Sorry?
Summer.
Maybe summer again.
Yeah. But I'm so excited. I feel like I really needed good news.
Yeah. Any predictions for that season? Like what books are they going to
Christy and the Snobs.
Yep.
Logan likes Marianne.
Because remember, Shannon was in the last episode.
Oh, yeah,
that was our first Easter egg for the second season.
Yeah. So that Logan likes Marianne. Maybe one starring Mallory and one starring Jesse.
Did you notice that they were in the video, Mallory and Jesse both?
Yeah.
Which made me really happy. And they sang the theme song from the other TV show, which also made me really happy. And yeah. I'm hoping they do, and I forget the book's name, but the one where there's a secret passage leading to Dawn's room and like a potential kind of haunting. And it's early. It's like the 9th or 10th book.
Oh,
yeah.
I bet
so. I hope so.
I bet they'll do something like Mallory on Strike. Would be a fun one for the show. Yeah. Hopefully Jessie has a ballet focused one, or the one where she learned sign language. That was a good.
I would love that.
Book. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That one. Yeah. My favorite Jessie book was the one where she was in Swan Lake, with the lead in Swan Lake. And that girl with the like Karen mom wanted her to be the lead, so she was like sabotaging Jessie.
She was the lead in Coppelia.
Oh yeah.
I don't know how I remember that.
So I guess it's time to start thinking about who we can bring on as guests when we do the deep dive into season 2.
Yes.
And the other really good bit of news is they announced that there's going to be a series based on Jennifer Weiner's Good in Bed, her debut novel. It will be on HBO Max. There is no air date yet. And what's even better is that Mindy Kaling is adapting it and producing and starring in.
Yay.
So
good.
Yeah, like
Kelly,
I
did you say series?
I don't think we actually do know that. I might have said series. I didn't mean to, because I don't think they've specified book or movie. I mean, series or movie. I'm down for either.
Right.
A series would be great.
A series would be great. They don't need to do certain girls though if they don't want to.
It says feature film adaptation for HBO Max.
That's good too.
Oh, Mindy Kaling's the perfect choice to do this. I am very excited.
Love it.
And I can't believe it hasn't happened yet. That book was published so long ago.
Yeah.
I've read that Jennifer Weiner has said that there have been many attempts, many adaptations that have like she's that once the script gets to like the screenwriters and producers, it kind of falls apart. So
Okay.
I'm sure in the aughts and maybe early 2010s, they probably, I'm glad they didn't adapt it at that point. I don't think they would have been able to do it, the storyline well, with regards to a plus size female lead.
It's a good point.
You know, I think Mindy Kaling's the perfect, like you said, Julia, perfect for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Ooh, and if you guys liked Never Have I Ever, that is also getting a second season on Netflix, which Mindy Kaling has also produced.
Right.
And really, really
Loved
good.
it. I loved it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
But now we get into the controversy. It is not my genre, so I'm just going to say this and then get out of your way. But Time Magazine did a list of the 100 best fantasy books
Of all time.
of all time.
Mm-hmm.
That is a list they have made.
So they brought together a panel of really famous fantasy authors, N.K. Jemisin, Neil Gaiman, Sabaa Tahir, Tomi Adeyemi, Diana Gabaldon, George R.R. Martin. But okay, we'll talk about it. Cassandra Clare, we'll talk about it. So they had this panel and they voted on the best fantasy books of all time. And some of these authors' books did end up on the list, but they weren't voting for their own books, so they could only vote for other people's books. So, it's a good, diverse panel of people, of authors. Some write YA, some write, and just come from different backgrounds. So it's great that they had that. And a lot of the choices I do agree with. There's some obvious ones on there. The Lord of the Rings. There's, Harry Potter. A couple of Harry Potter books are on there. Things like that. But there are some interesting choices on there. So the first one that struck me as odd was Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. I wouldn't call that fantasy. It's romance with a fantastical twist in order to make the romance happen.
It's historical romance with an element of fantasy, but that is not the main thing about the book.
That's not the genre.
No.
That threw me off.
Yeah.
For sure. I also, City of Glass by Cassandra Clare is on that. I'm not here to bash any authors. I read City of Bones and it did not make me want to read the rest of the series. I didn't think it was that great. It's also, I don't know if I would call it, I guess it would call it fantasy. I don't know, sometimes the line between sci-fi and fantasy when it comes to demons and vampires and stuff, I'm like, which is which? So, but yeah, there were some interesting choices on there. I don't quite agree with all of them. And I think if they had done a 50 best books of all time kind of thing, it might have come up with a better list.
I do think though that having 100 means that they were more pulling from a more diverse list, which is nice. If The Bone Clocks by David Mitchell is on here, then I'm glad that all of N.K. Jemisin's Broken Earth trilogy is on here. I was happy to see a Rebecca Rowanhorse book on here, although I think the Black Sun should have been on here, although maybe it was just published a little too late to make the list. But Alatsue, great that's on here. So I'm happy to see, a pretty diverse list. And I also agree there are some questionable choices. I totally agree about Outlander. It just doesn't, and I also wouldn't say it's that great of a book. Whether it's fantasy or not, it's good, but I don't know, just a weird choice. Also, why do they have to put more than one Harry Potter? Why not just put the whole, like, why can't the series count as
Right.
one?
It is
That's what I don't understand.
It is weird. And I think, did they do that with the Lord of the Rings too?
They did.
Which is even weirder because the Lord of the Rings is just one book in 3 volumes.
Right.
So,
I would also argue the Broken Earth trilogy could have been one, like maybe all of the Broken Earth trilogy, especially Obelisk's Gate.
yeah. Yes, the Lord of the Rings was 3 entries. All 3 volumes made the list. So it should have been, because it's 3 volumes of one book, it should have only been one.
So the lesson is Time Magazine doesn't understand book series. But
Yes.
it's cool that they did it. And hopefully a lot of these books get more readers because of it. So
For sure. Yeah. There's some, I agree. Most of the choices I was like, oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, just kind of funny how, I don't know, maybe it was rushed and they just didn't get enough input from people on it. I don't know.
maybe.
Yeah. They could have come up with a list of 200 books and had people vote. I don't know. So our next segment is recent acquisitions. So Julia, why don't you go first? Tell us what you've recently acquired.
I don't have a ton of recent acquisitions, but a very good friend, surprised me with a Kindle gift of Rebecca Solnit's Hope in the Dark. So thank you, Kelly. And I haven't read it yet, but it's I think, a collection of essays from the early 2000s that was re-released a few years ago and updated. And I think I might need it for some hope pretty soon. Hopefully I won't need it for hope pretty soon. Hopefully, well, we'll get into it. But yeah, so thanks, Kelly. That was very nice.
You're welcome.
Kelly gave me that book too. Thanks, Kelly.
You're welcome. Hopefully it will make the waiting for results a little bit easier, or not.
Kelly, how about you? What have you acquired?
Okay, so I pre-ordered the new Dash and Lily book, Mind the Gap, Dash and Lily, which comes out on Tuesday today. So I'm very excited for that. And there will be a Netflix series starting next week about Dash and Lily. So if you haven't read it, I think you'll both still like the series. Lily is a super optimistic girl. She is actual sunshine who is obsessed with Christmas. So,
Aw.
yeah. And then also, I got They Never Learn by Lane Fargo, which is about a professor, and every year she finds the worst man on campus and kills him. So.
What?
Yes.
All right, I need that book.
I'm very excited. It looks dark.
That's funny. All right, so my recent acquisitions were, as I said, the gift from Kelly, Hope in the Dark. I also received an ebook of Chasing Alice by Stephanie Fowler, which we'll be talking about on next week's episode. And I did get this planner called The Bookworm Life. It's from my favorite Etsy shop, Peanut Butter Taco. And it's really cute. It just has, like, you can write down what your reading goals are for the year. Like here, you can track what your most anticipated book releases are. You can track what you're reading every month. So I think I'm going to be using it as a book planner and podcast planner. So since we're podcasting about books, so they can go together, and the artwork is very cute. And this Etsy shop also sells a lot of fun planner stickers. So if you're a planner person like me, check it out, Peanut Butter Taco on Etsy, and her prices are really good, I feel like.
I ordered one too.
Yay! Oh my gosh, planner twins.
Yep.
All right.
I had a gift card on Etsy and you told me about that planner and I said, I have to have it. So,
Right. Awesome.
yeah.
I can't wait to see it when you get it.
How's your book buying ban going, Rachel?
Really well. I have not bought any books. I've just received them as gifts or like e-galleys or whatnot. I'm thinking of breaking it for Talia Hibbert's new Christmassy book on Kobo.
Uh-huh.
We'll see. I probably will. I'll be getting into the Christmas spirit pretty quick here. I already had peppermint mocha coffee this morning. So, I mean, it's November 1st, so it's the Christmas season.
Halloween is over. It's Christmas season time.
Yeah.
Pre-Halloween. We're in
Yeah.
the pre-Halloween season.
We'll talk about it more. Okay, well, great. So we are going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we are joined by Professor Jeff Willis to talk about political books. So stick around and we'll be right back.
Welcome back, everybody. We are here with our guest, Jeff Willis, Dr. Jeff Willis, who's joined us for our chat about political books. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So tell us about your background with your political science degrees.
All right. So I have a PhD in political science and international relations, actually. My background is, I would say my sort of area of focus has been climate change politics and policy, particularly international climate change politics and policy. I've been involved in climate change activism projects sort of aside from the political science PhD. I've done a lot of traveling to different regions that are impacted differently by climate change. So that's really, yeah, a lot of my sort of specialty knowledge is in that area. But yeah, I have a political science PhD, which I did in New Zealand. I lived there for 5 years while I was doing my degree. And I have a political science degree, an undergraduate degree from the University of Maine here in Western Maine. So that's a bit about my background.
Where's your favorite place that you traveled for to do climate change research and activism?
That's a tough question. I'll say I'm going to cheat and give you two. Like
Okay.
in 2017, I traveled to Antarctica in January, not specifically to do climate change research. That was for a TEDx project that I was working on. But while I was there, I got to talk to a lot of the scientists down there and sort of get their insights about what was sort of happening on the ground in Antarctica. So obviously, one of the most isolated places in the world. That same year, in June, July, and August, I went out into the Pacific Islands and I went to Kiribati, which is also one of the places in the world that is most impacted by climate change because it's only 2 meters above sea level, the entire country, and is also one of the most isolated places in the world. So that was a big year for me, just seeing these two really, really different places that are both being impacted by climate change in really different ways, within several months of each other. So I would say that's kind of, I don't know if favorite is the right word, because it's intense to see that kind of stuff. But that was definitely the most sort of interesting experience I had.
Cool.
So this is going to sound sarcastic, but is actually a genuine question. With your life being political science and climate change, how do you have any sort of hope whatsoever? Because I'm spiraling right now. So how do you do this and keep going?
It is tough. It is definitely tough. I mean, I'll give you another like quick anecdote before I actually answer your question. In 2016, the week before the election, when Trump was elected, I was in Belgium for a conference on environmental refugees. So I went from there to Donald Trump being elected within like several days, and that was really hard. That was one of the lower moments that I had. But One of the things that keeps me going is in a lot of the different projects that I've worked on and a lot of places that I've been, just seeing how passionate people are and how hard people are working sort of behind the scenes in ways that we don't often think about and don't often see. I was in Paris when COP21 happened, when the Paris Agreement was negotiated and signed on the NGO side, and seeing just the enthusiasm, um, the work that people are doing to influence not just politicians, but wider society. It's really helpful. It's really helpful to step back and think, because it can feel like we're just kind of racing off this cliff and nobody really cares. And that's not true. There's a lot of people that really care and are working really hard and are making, a big difference in the aggregate. So, I mean, that's something that I think about a lot that kind of keeps me going a bit.
That's nice to hear, and nice to think about the
Yeah.
bigger picture too.
Right.
Like, I feel like we all every day there's a new story about something that just makes us frustrated or angry, but when you step back and see there is work being done and there have been changes in the positive direction,
Mhm.
that's
Yeah.
nice to think about.
Yeah.
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 And honestly, I mean, I don't know how much we'll talk about the election and whatnot. I don't want to get too deep into it before we talk about other stuff. But I will say, from a climate change policy perspective, Joe Biden's platform is really good. Like, I'm excited about it. It's really good. And I'm not just saying that like, oh, it's, the better of two evils. Like, it's good.
Yeah.
And the House in particular, this last congressional term has done some really good work on producing climate change reports that are really exciting and would theoretically influence a Biden administration. That said, there would have to be a lot of work to get any of it done. But as a policy platform, it's good. Um, and also, we don't know what's going to happen with the election. But that is something that I think about and I think is hopeful.
Yeah. That's good. It can be, I feel like just hearing you talking about things going on all over the world, it can be easy to sort of stay in my United States bubble and have no hope. And while it is important what the United States does, our policy does have a very strong global impact because of the size of our economy and just how much, we really produce, how many carbon emissions we produce, so it's not unimportant what the US is doing. But it's also important to remember that it's not just us also,
Yeah.
looking to other countries that are stepping up and get inspired by that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that my PhD thesis was about two island states in the Pacific, Kiribati and Tuvalu, and how they communicate about climate change. And they obviously face sort of an existential threat that we don't face in the same way. But the work as two really tiny island states by population size that they've been able to do and kind of the movement that they've been able to produce at the international level is really inspiring. And I think you're right. When you're in the US, and I am guilty of this as well, we get so caught in our bubble. Like, everything is the US's job to fix. It's our job to lead this. It's our job to fix that. And that's just not really an accurate picture of like what international politics is
Right.
necessarily.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's right.
I do kind of wish though that we would grow up a little and try to take that leadership role again, or for once, I guess maybe.
Yeah.
Step up a little bit, and hopefully with the election, dun dun dun, happening the day this podcast drops, hopefully we'll be on the right track. But yeah. But yes,
Yeah,
it's
I
not
mean,
just
there's
us.
a lot of work to be done to sort of regain any kind of voice of authority on
Yeah.
a lot of
Yep.
international issues.
Mhm.
Definitely. Well, speaking of politics and everything, we've all read some books and are going to talk about them, just various different kinds of political books. I know there's probably a lot of nonfiction, but there's some fiction also, because sometimes it can be nice to look at politics through the fictional theoretical, uh, lens. So, Jeff, do you want to start us off with your first recommendation for a political book?
Sure. Okay, so my approach to picking these recommendations was to get some books, try to find books that I felt sort of spoke to issues that we're kind of dealing with today, but aren't necessarily like directly about the election or Trump or whatever. Although Biden makes kind of like a cameo appearance in one of mine. But so the first one that I picked, I'm gonna try and go in chronological order of like what the book addresses. The first one I picked was The Impeachers by Brenda Wineapple, and it is about the impeachment of Andrew Johnson in 1868. Um, so this was published in 2019 before the Trump impeachment. So there's a bunch of reasons why I picked this. The first is obviously, while it seems odd because it has not been a part of the election conversation very much, we were in an impeachment trial at the beginning of 2020, about 4 years ago. So, um,
Yeah.
so this speaks to that a little bit. But so to kind of get into it a bit, my impression of the Andrew Johnson impeachment before I read this book, I didn't know much about it. But my impression was basically that Congress had sort of passed an unconstitutional law. They had a confrontational relationship with Andrew Johnson. They passed this kind of bogus law. He violated it, and then they impeached him because he violated this law that basically they passed so that he would violate it so they could impeach him. That was sort of my impression. And that's like part of the story. But it's actually a much deeper, there's a lot more sort of deep elements to what was going on. So like the rough timeline is the Civil War happens early in the 1860s. In 1865, Lincoln's assassinated. Andrew Johnson was his vice president, and so he automatically becomes the president. And at that time, there was no provision for selecting a new vice president, so he just doesn't have one. And Andrew Johnson was kind of an interesting character. He was from Tennessee. He had been a senator. He was the only senator from what became the Confederate States to vote against seceding from the Union, which is how he became the vice president. But he was also a very strong sort of states' rights, Southern politician from that era. And he becomes the president. The Civil War's just ended, and there's sort of three factions in Congress. The radical Republicans, who are basically the faction that is advocating for the most rights for the freed slaves. Then the moderate Republicans, who sort of don't necessarily care about the free slaves, but are interested in sort of sticking it to the South a bit. And then the Democrats, which is just like the Southern Party, and they're basically outright white nationalists and racists. So those are the factions. And there's a big push when Andrew Johnson becomes president to sort of deal with the Southern states because nobody knows how to do it, right? Like they have been out of the Union fighting this war. And now everybody's like, well, what happens? Like, do we let them back into the government? Like, do we reorganize them? Like, what do we do? And there's a big sort of push from the radical Republicans to really restructure the Southern states in ways that would sort of alleviate some of the racial tension in theory. And Andrew Johnson just immediately is like, no, like I don't buy any of that. His perspective is because there's no clause in the Constitution for a state to leave the Union, legally they had never left. So actually they're still part of the government and we don't have to do anything. Like they can just come back and be in Congress and it's fine. So they have big fights about that. Andrew Johnson, I mean, really is racist. Like every time that the radical Republicans or anybody in Congress tries to pass anything, he's against it. He fights against the first Civil Rights Act. He basically vetoes every Reconstruction bill. And so they're constantly butting heads. And at that point, Congress does pass this sort of bogus law, which is the Tenure of Office Act, which basically just says you can't fire a cabinet member without getting congressional approval. Andrew Johnson does fire a cabinet member. He gets impeached. And then he is ultimately acquitted by one vote. So it's a really interesting story that speaks a lot to racial tensions that we're still experiencing in the United States in 2020. It speaks to impeachment questions that we were just dealing with earlier in 2020. And yeah, I think there's sort of echoes of the politics of that time today. And there's one thing I just wanted to read a quick quote from it, and then I'll stop talking about it. Andrew Johnson, he's an interesting character, but I want to read this one quote and see if it reminds you of anybody. So this is a quote from the book. Andrew Johnson was not a statesman. He was a man with a fear of losing ground, with a need to be recognized, with an obsession to be right, and when seeking revenge on enemies or perceived enemies, he had to humiliate, harass, and hound them. Heedless of consequences, he baited Congress and bullied men, believing his enemies were enemies of the people.
No, that doesn't remind me of anyone. I can't think of a
Yeah.
single.
Very interesting.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's that book. I'll just say it's a history book, but it's not dry. Like it's very
Yeah.
interesting. It's very engaging. So
Sounds
I
good.
recommend it.
Nice. Thank you. Julia, what about your first pick?
Sure. So my first pick is Hiding in Plain Sight by Sarah Kendzior. And I heard about this book because I was following Sarah Kendzior on Twitter after she wrote this article after the 2016 election that basically laid out where we were going as a country. And it turns out she was exactly right. And she also has a podcast called Gaslit Nation, which I've listened to, which is really good. The book is basically her laying out how the Trump administration is really a transnational crime syndicate masquerading as a government. And this book, I will say, I read it for the podcast. I had it on my to be read list anyway, but I'm all in my head about it. I'm very anxious now after having read this book. But I think it's important to read. So Sarah Kendzior is a journalist. She's also an expert on authoritarian governments, specifically in Uzbekistan. That's her area of research and her PhD. And she lives in St. Louis. So she, has said, I reject this idea that as a journalist and, someone who writes about these big issues that I have to live somewhere like New York or DC. That's, really an expensive city. I have more financial freedom living in Missouri. She doesn't work for the New York Times, right? So she has more journalistic freedom, she feels. And because of this, and because of the topics she writes about and researches, she is a very dangerous person to people like Trump and specifically Jared Kushner, who has gone after her and she gets death threats. But she just basically lays out how since the 70s, when Trump, became an adult and, was like in New York and doing all of his business, he has been involved with the mafia and the mob from a very early time, and specifically the Russian mafia. And like she lays out all these connections. And yeah, it's very, very scary to read, but it definitely just makes you kind of opens your eyes if you aren't already opening your eyes to how corrupt the Trump administration is. Her prediction, and I've totally bought into this, is that even if Trump is out of office, eventually we will have President Ivanka Trump. Like that is the ultimate goal, is to get her to be president. So it's just crazy. And what really struck me was in the beginning, she compares Trump to the leader in Uzbekistan, whose name now I can't remember, but he was there for a long time, authoritarian government. But basically she's like, oh, he was this kind of like non-political figure with this fashionista daughter who he installed in his government and made the media the enemy of the people, and like all these things that were just exactly what we see from Trump. So very interesting, very scary, but a really good read. So that's Hiding in Plain Sight by Sarah Kendzior. Deep breathing. Practice some deep breathing after.
I considered I considered picking the Mueller report as one of my books for this. And I'll just, without talking about it too much, I will say, I think you can make an argument that the Mueller probe and sort of the wider conversation about Russia actually was helpful to Trump in that it sort of gave him something to hang his hat on and say, look, this is not legitimate. This is just like government run wild. It's the deep state, whatever, whatever.
Right.
And that actually obfuscated like a lot of the stuff that I'm sure is talked about in that book that is, you know, hiding in plain sight, as you
Yeah.
said.
Well, and like the title comes from the fact that like Trump is doing all of these things. Like there's so much crime and corruption happening that there is evidence for.
Yeah.
And it's almost like as a country, like our collective psyche is basically like, well, it can't be true because it's so bad. You know, it's almost like it's so big and so bad that you can't really like comprehend that this is happening and also he's president.
Right.
But it
Yeah.
is, and it's and yeah, they're hiding in plain sight.
You can't grasp any one thing because there is so much.
Right.
Like that's one of the biggest problems I always find is like every week, almost every day, there's a scandal that would have been a major scandal in any other administration, and now it's just like chaff in the media.
This is Trump's reality show continued, basically. So yeah, the Apprentice got canceled, but now he's got a different reality show, and it's so anyway. That was mine. Sorry.
Sorry, we get it out of the way.
Yeah. Lighter ones later.
Yes, exactly. Kelly, what's your first pick?
No, thank you. Okay. So my first pick is Unprecedented by Martha Brokenbrough, whose name I've been mispronouncing this entire time, but it really is Brokenbrough. And it is her incredibly intensive biography of Donald Trump. It's mostly his childhood and then time in business up to now, basically. The paperback release just came out, and it includes the impeachment and COVID. So it is this absolute doorstop of a book, and researched and cited to within an inch of its life. She also discusses the mob, like his ties to the mob and Russia and everything, all laid out very clearly and straightforward. It's just, it's like, how is this even happening? Like, how is this the world where the person in charge of making things better for the most number of people possible is just making the worst possible choice every single time? It's, I don't know. The past 4 years have broken me, basically. Like,
Yeah,
sure, this is where we are.
for sure.
But it's incredibly interesting, and I was going to say easy to read, but it's not, because it just feels completely ridiculous that he keeps getting rewarded with more power and more adulation, and the people that love him, like, they talk about him like he is literally Jesus, and I do not understand any of it. I'm sure we're going to be getting some really good books in a couple years about the psychology of that, but yeah. There is a really fun anecdote though, where he got sent to boarding school, and he and his roommate didn't get along, and the roommate actually, I forget, it was like a bat or something, but like his roommate actively hit him with like a bat or a hockey stick or something. And Martha is my friend, so I asked if maybe we could get a little bit more of a better description of this roommate beating, and maybe there were pictures, but there is not further information, unfortunately. But not all heroes wear capes.
Yeah.
My goodness, wow. I can't imagine being roommates with someone like that, so
Yeah.
I can't pass judgment on choices that may have had to have been made. But
Whatever happened, he deserved it. I fully believe it.
yeah, I mean, and that's definitely one, I think about there's different types of political books that you can read, and biographies are one type that I think are probably pretty popular, or even just an outsider kind of looking in and trying to figure out everything that happened. So, which, like, my first book is one I've talked about on the podcast before, but it's Rage by Bob Woodward. And it's definitely, it's outsiders looking in, and really going in depth on President Trump's most of his first term, basically. It focuses a lot on the relationship between him and Kim Jong-un. And it also goes into a little bit about, his dealings with Vladimir Putin. And it follows Rex Tillerson for a little while. And it's honestly, it's fascinating. I read it a couple of months ago, and everything in that book, of course, most of it is happened before COVID. And I was like, I almost forgot all of this because so much happened in the last 4 years that has been insane. And, such a big, like, historical moment of like, wow, we've never, dealt with something like this before, or not in our lifetime anyway. So it's pretty interesting, and I think a book that can go through the details of a presidency like that and make it interesting and not dry and not boring, is worth the read. It's definitely kind of hard to read, but there's some funny moments because inevitably, even if you're just laughing at the irony of it.
Yeah, Bob Woodward's books are always pretty good. I read his Obama one. I don't know if he did multiple Obama. I read one of the Obama ones, if he did more than one, for an undergrad course once. I'm glad actually now I didn't pick any of these Trump books because you guys all pick Trump books, which is great.
That was my only Trump book.
It's good. I've mostly tried to avoid those books because it seems to me like they often are just sort of confirming things that we kind of already know.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of stuff that's sort of already in the media sphere, already sort of in the public consciousness, and they just like maybe concern details, but it's like in general we sort of know this stuff. But like
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just say that's what's so worrisome, right? Like all of this stuff is out there, we know it, and then there are still more books being written about it, but because the strategy has been make fake news the enemy, then you can just, claim that it's all lies, even though we know it's not. But right. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it is tough. Like I think the media's never really figured out how to deal with Trump. And like, I still don't think they have. I think they're doing a lot better job in this election cycle than in the previous one. But like, it's still, how do you deal with somebody like him who just, he goes out into the debate and basically everything that he says is inaccurate. And like, how do you deal with that when like an accurate statement from him is like the diamond in the rough, like it's not the reverse. And that's tough. I don't envy them being in that position.
Yeah.
Same. Yeah, it's definitely, on the one hand, it's like, what good is it for me to read this? And on the other hand, I think it's definitely helped me sort of keep a perspective and not like spiral into like what's happening. It's like, okay, I know what's happening. I know what happened. I mean, we really just basically lucked out that North Korea didn't nuke us. It wasn't anything special Trump did to stop it, even though he'll kind of claim it. But just based on reading the book, it was very much like, oh, yeah, we kind of really dodged a literal bullet there. And who knows what would have happened. But anyway, it was interesting, an interesting book. So
Okay, so that brings it around to me again. Um, this is the book I I really struggled with whether I wanted to talk about this book or not. It's Game Change. I don't know if you've heard of this. This book is
I've heard
really
of this, yeah.
famous. There's a movie about it. I struggled with picking it because so it's by John Heilemann and Mark Halperin. And in 2017, Mark Halperin was fired from all his punditry jobs, I think particularly with NBC, for sexual harassment claims. And I struggled with whether I wanted to talk about this book because people have mixed feelings about whether you want to sort of consume a work by somebody who's found themselves in that position. And I mean, that's totally reasonable. He's sort of in the interim kind of had a comeback as a pundit. He's not as prominent as he used to be. Um, but ultimately, I decided to go with it because it is such a famous book. A lot of people will have read this before any of that stuff came out. And I do think it has sort of relevant, important information for 2020. So just to start by flagging that, um, and now to talk about the actual book. This book it's about the 2008 election cycle, basically from the primaries through Obama winning the presidency. It's famous because of its portrayal of Sarah Palin, even though she actually is a relatively small part of the book. That is what got the most attention from this work, and that's what the movie is about. Is about her, and I'll talk about that in a second. But so it starts with the primary season, Obama versus Clinton. It's that's a really bruising primary, like much more than we've seen really since then. It goes to the bitter end. By the end, they basically hate each other, Obama and Hillary Clinton. Obama ultimately wins. And I think one of the interesting things is it says something about both their character, setting aside whatever you think of their governance, that he then offers her the Secretary of State job because he didn't need to do that. And like they really did not like each other at that point. So, I mean, I think that's an interesting element. On the Republican side, the primary is not really as interesting. John McCain wins fairly convincingly, fairly quickly. So there's that. Joe Biden makes a cameo in here as the vice president. Doesn't talk about him a lot, but I found it interesting when I was flipping back through this before talking about it that Biden wanted the Secretary of State job first. He didn't want to be the vice president. He kind of had to be convinced to take that job. But okay, so like I said, the most famous part of this book is the Sarah Palin thing, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about a bit more. Because she's kind of portrayed in here as basically having a mental breakdown, like during the election cycle. And to be fair to her, she says the portrayal of her in here is not accurate, and the one that she wrote about in her own biography, Going Rogue, is more accurate. So, make of that what you will. But nobody's really seriously disputed what's in this book besides her. But in case it seems so long ago and not that long ago in other ways, she was the governor of Alaska. She was basically a national unknown. I think she's a really interesting figure in American politics. I don't think she's really well understood. When she was picked, she was the most popular governor in the United States. She'd been governor for 2 years. She'd sort of risen through the ranks of Alaskan politics by calling out corruption in the Republican Party and basically by being right about it. And then defeating Frank Murkowski, who is the current Alaskan Senator Lisa Murkowski's dad and was like the kingmaker of Alaskan politics. So like she was popular and she had reason to be. And then she gets selected just basically as like a Hail Mary by the McCain campaign. And she comes down to the lower 48 to campaign and it's just like clearly overwhelmed and like clearly not prepared for the position that she's been put in. And in a lot of respects, I don't think that is her fault. Like she wasn't prepared, but like she was put in an impossible position. So I do have a little bit of sympathy for her in that regard. I think in the later years, sort of since this has happened, she's become a bit more ridiculous in reality shows and the different things.
Right.
But like at that time, I think there's reason to sort of be a bit more sympathetic to her position. Um, but in terms of 2020, the point I wanted to make about that was that she is really a precursor of Trump in the way that she's like a rock star. Like she doesn't really have any comprehensive policy knowledge. She's not really able to talk about governance in a significant way, but she is a rock star and she brings out people to her campaigns and campaign stops in like really interesting ways and sort of becomes more popular than McCain um, without a lot of substance to like undergird that. And I think you can look at that and look at what Trump has been able to do and be like, in some ways, Sarah Palin laid groundwork
Yeah.
for this to happen. Um, so, yeah, I
A
mean
lot of
that's basically
the
it. That's what I wanted to say about that book.
a lot of the stoking she did too of, when Obama was running for president the first time of racism and Islamophobia around him. I remember those campaign rallies where, John McCain had to at one point like tamper it down, but
Yeah,
her role, when she would do those rallies, she kind of fed into it. And then, obviously Trump and the birther movement, his whole thing with that. So there is definitely a connection there.
yeah. I mean, I think to McCain's credit, especially by the end where it's like it's clear that he's going to lose,
Yeah.
he does make an effort to tamp down on that kind of rhetoric. But you're right,
Yeah.
she feeds into it more than he does. To the extent to which she really understood the impact she was having, I think is debatable. Well, not that makes it better, but
Yeah.
Yep. That sounds interesting, that book. I might read that.
It does feel like so long ago, but it wasn't really.
No. There's a sequel to this called Double Down about 2012. But like that race just isn't as interesting. Like Obama versus Romney, like there's no really compelling characters in the same way. It's still good. I mean, the one thing I'll say about this book is it's a book that I probably liked better before I sort of did my PhD and had the background that I have than I do now, because it's not about governance. Like if you go in expecting like I'm going to learn about policy positions and like how people govern and all that kind of stuff, it's not that. It's much more of a tabloidy, like behind the scenes, like this is sort of gossipy what people were saying and doing and thinking, which is interesting in its own right. But just don't go in thinking like, oh, I'm going to learn about like Obama's 2008 policy position on the financial crisis or whatever, because you won't.
Yeah. All right. Are we back to me?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So my next pick is definitely a turn from my last pick. It's much book that will make you feel good, I think, is Alyssa Mastromonaco's Who Thought This Was a Good Idea? And this is a book that she wrote. She was the youngest woman to hold the role of deputy chief of staff. So she was Obama's deputy chief of staff. And she says she got there through hard work and, as she says, not being a jerk. And it's a really, it's part memoir, part advice book. I think, if you like Mindy Kaling's books and The West Wing, then this is kind of a good combination of those. It is, I think, written with a YA audience in mind, because it has a lot of advice, especially for young women. If you're thinking of going into politics or even just, work and life in general, she talks about, her values and how she feels like she got to where she is and just tries to, give, whatever advice she can offer in that realm. But it's just really funny. It's sort of a collection of essays. It's kind of a cool look into the behind the scenes of the Obama administration and the work that they were doing there. She gets to go on all these, she has a lot of funny stories of being like, meeting the Queen and needing a new pair of pants because her pants ripped, or she throws in some embarrassing anecdotes, especially the story about being in the Vatican and not being able to find a bathroom, which was pretty hilarious. And then she also worked for Bernie Sanders for one of his, I can't remember if it was working with him. I read it a few years ago, but I can't remember if it was working for his Senate office in Vermont, or a campaign. I can't remember which one, but she says that, I remember she says she tried to like impress him by telling him about this time that she and her friends were protesting and they like climbed up on Newt Gingrich's car or something like that. And he was like, I mean, yeah, like what else would you have done? Like he wasn't impressed. He's like, but yeah, so it's really, it's, you know, an easy read. It's kind of a feel good and will make you nostalgic for better times. But that's Alyssa Mastromonaco's Who Thought This Was a Good Idea. And she's often, if you listen to political podcasts, she is often on the Pod Save America podcast. And she worked with all those guys in the Obama administration. So check her out there sometimes as well.
Great. Thanks. That sounds good after I read that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm here to bring the mood down again. My next one is Hoax by Brian Stelter, which is basically about Fox News and Donald Trump and the way they've sort of fed into each other and everyone's worst impulses. But if you have thought, wow, Fox News has really ruined an entire generation of people by making them like intellectually lazy and also racist and afraid of silly things, well, read Hoax. It's not all in your head. It's super depressing, and I think it's also true because the people I know that watch Fox News, yeah, they seem very uneasy about everything. They're the people that post things about George Floyd, like, well, if he had just listened to police and not broken the law. Yes, those people. And it's just, it's almost not their fault because all they do is watch Fox News. So all they're getting is like actual lies that is not true at all. But they've also been conditioned to believe that the only things that are true are the things that the Fox News people tell them. So I don't know how you break the cycle. And Brian Stelter didn't have any answers either. So, hey.
Thanks for the great book recommendation.
That does sound interesting.
Yeah,
It's really good. I will redeem
I do want to
myself
read it.
with the third pick, though.
Okay.
Well, my second pick is it's one of those, like, if you want to learn about the issues and how, you know, the different political parties, you know, view them, and it's a pretty good one. It's called What You Should Know About Politics But Don't, a Nonpartisan Guide to the Issues. The author is Jessamine Conrad, and she goes through like a bunch of, you know, major issues like the Iraq War, the tariffs and things. She goes through certain social issues, different economic issues, and she basically, each chapter is, she takes one issue, she says, this is the issue, this is where we are now, this is the background of it, the whole history of everything, and then this is how all the different like political views approach it, and this is what, you know, these people believe, this is what these people believe, this is how these people think we should solve it, and it really is just very informative. I thought it was really good. I learned some things I didn't know. There's a chapter in there about renewable energy and, you know, sort of the oil crisis. It was first published in 2008, but I think I read an updated version because there were some things from Obama's presidency in there, but nothing super like recent, super recent. I think nothing from Trump's presidency, but I did find it very informative, you know, not scary or anything, just sort of, okay, you know, you could kind of see where all sides are coming from and like why they think how they think and sort of where beliefs stemmed from and where it all started. So I thought that was interesting. So that's What You Should Know About Politics, ... but don't, a nonpartisan guide to the issues.
Is that
Cool.
mostly just sort of from the American perspective? Does it talk about international sort of perspectives on issues?
It does kind of a little bit. I mean, it's mostly from an American perspective, but it does kind of like the chapter on universal health care. It does go into kind of what some other countries do, but the main meat of it is, you know, this is where we are in the U.S. and this is where people people think we should go based on their political affiliations or whatnot.
Cool. That sounds really interesting. I wonder if there's like a 2020 version.
Right? Yeah, I think there's maybe been like one update, but not. I'm sure that there were definitely a few things, especially with like universal healthcare and everything, that I would like to get the author's perspective on. Where we are at now. It hasn't changed that much since the book was published in terms of what people think we need, but especially in light of the pandemic, I think that has maybe changed how some people view universal health care.
Yeah. All right. So my third book is Why We're Polarized by Ezra Klein. You might be familiar with Ezra Klein. He's the co-founder of Vox, a reasonably well-known journalist, sort of on the left side of the spectrum. Of the three books that I picked, this is the most like sort of hardcore political science-y. Ezra Klein is not a political scientist, but he draws from a lot of political science and a lot of journalists, a lot of different things, and making his arguments. I mean, anything I say about this book is going to be doing a huge disservice to his argument, because it's like you kind of need to read it. Like each chapter sort of builds really elegantly on the last in making his argument about why we're polarized. But to do that disservice and kind of sum it up really succinctly, basically the sort of top line of the argument that he's making is that over the last, really since the 1960s, political parties in the United States have sort of become identities for a lot of people in a way that they weren't previously. So prior to the 60s and even into the 60s, one of the things that political scientists were saying was that there's actually not enough polarization in the political parties, which seems really crazy now, but like they're just, political scientists were worried that there wasn't enough of a strong distinction between left and right. And so it was just creating this muddle of like people not having really clear cut choices, and it was sort of impacting how things were governed. And then what changed was the Civil Rights Act in 1964. That sort of created a rupture where post-Civil Rights Act, which was passed by Democrat Lyndon Johnson and a Democratic Congress, the Democrats sort of electorally were just never going to win the South in the immediate to medium term. And Republicans sort of gradually lost their electoral prospects in the more urban, sort of diverse cities. And so from that point, the parties really start to diverge like pretty significantly. The Democratic Party in general becomes more diverse. The Republican Party in general becomes less diverse. And they really start to separate. Things accelerate in the 90s, accelerate more in the 2000s. And there's all kinds of reasons why that happens that I think it's better if you just read the book rather than going through all of them point by point. But like some of them are demographics in the US do start to change increasingly in the 2000s. The parties get weaker. So we didn't used to elect people via the sort of complicated primary system that we have now. We had primaries, but it was basically just like party bosses that chose who was going to be the nominee. And there's a rise in sort of ideological, sort of activist media like Fox News that creates this kind of feedback loop, particularly on the Republican side. yeah, just a lot of things sort of become kind of a feedback loop where um, it just gets really hard for the parties to sort of break out of the conventional wisdom of their own ideologies, and that makes things more polarized. And a lot of it just has to do with the structure of the US government, which is unique in the world, really, um, in terms of how the Senate is elected, how the House is elected. The presidency being sort of separate from the government is really unique in compared to the rest of the Western democracies, anyways. Um, so it's a really good book. It's really elegantly written. Um, it's not hard to understand. Like the argument is fairly complex, but it's not difficult to understand. It's not written in a way that's hard to understand. So um, I would recommend that if you are interested in why we are polarized.
That sounds really good. Yeah. Okay. Okay, my last pick is similar to Jeff. Your first pick was more history, but still related to politics. This one I would categorize that as well, and it's Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi. It is the definitive history of racist ideas in America, and this book just has blown my mind. I've been reading it for the past, I guess, 6 months or so, 5 or 6 months, with an online book group, and we've been taking it part by part. So there's 5 parts, and then we did our last meeting this week about the epilogue. Basically, he takes us through the history of our country and how we developed, a lot of racist ideas and policies in America. And each part focuses on a different person in history who in some way influenced those ideas and those policies, and for good or for bad. And those people are Cotton Mather, part 1. Part 2 is Thomas Jefferson. Part 3 is William Lloyd Garrison. Part 4 is Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois, and the part 4 is Angela Davis. So kind of going through history. And I think there's just so much in this book. I mean, it is like 600-page book. So it's a big book, but it's definitely worth reading. I would recommend, kind of reading it slowly. And I had like discussion questions that we followed. I would recommend kind of treating it like that just to get the most out of it. Cause I ended up taking a lot of notes, and I felt like I was in school again, but in a good way, because, it kind of made me mad about a lot of things that we didn't learn about in school, or that wasn't emphasized as much as it should have. But I think the biggest thing I took away from this is throughout our history, even, when slavery was still happening, there were anti-racist ideas and writings being published, and people were, bringing forth ideas against racism and against slavery. And it's not an excuse that we can make anymore that like, oh, that was just a different time. No matter what time we're talking about, whether it's slavery, whether it is pre-civil rights movement, there's no like excuse for that kind of behavior. And it was just really like interesting the way that he lays it out. Like, no, actually, like these people were talking about it in this way. And the reason that they got shouted down was because, the slave owners decided, oh, a way to let's use religion now to like make our case. Like, let's use that to make our case that we can be able to keep slaves to help enrich us. And it's just like, so that I think is like my biggest takeaway from it. But there's so much history in the book, obviously, and obviously very relatable to the times that we're in now, and the discussions about anti-racism and the racial tensions in our country. I think it should be required reading. But yeah, so that's Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi.
That sounds so. I did buy that on your recommendation, and I do want to read it slowly, like you were, like spend a month on each section.
I'll read it again with you if you want. I need to reread it, like, because there is so much, and I'm sure I will get new things out of it if I reread it. Maybe in the new year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you read How to Be Anti-Racist?
Yes. Yep.
Because I read that earlier this year. I'm just wondering, like, do they work well as sort of companion pieces? Is there a lot of overlap?
There's not a ton of overlap because I feel like How to Be an Anti-Racist is much more his own experiences, his life experiences. And this is a history. It is like a history textbook, a history of the United States from the lens of the racism that the country was built on. And so, yeah, so they're good companion pieces. I would say what helped me by reading How to Be an Anti-Racist first is that in that book, he does, I think in the foreword of that book, he does talk about like what I said, like the, throughout history, there has been anti-racist thinking, and the How to Be an Anti-Racist is really more of a how-to, like how to like keep this in your mind, how to like work this into like how you approach the world. It's much more, I mean, he does talk about policies a lot. Kelly, I think you might be talking about this book next. I don't know.
No, I'm not.
Oh, you're not. Okay,
No.
good. But yeah, so that I would definitely recommend that one as well. But what I like about how to be an anti-racist is, again, he talks about his own experiences. Like he even starts the book with this speech he did for a debate style competition in high school. And in that speech, he talks about how, he's like 18 or something. And he's like, young Black men in this country need to like take more responsibility for, whatever, like basically the pull your pants up like type of argument. And he's like, I'm embarrassed now. Like that was a racist way of thinking. I held those racist ideas. And so he starts off with that anecdote, and like throughout the book, he talks about different times in his life where he recognizes the fact that he had these like racist ways of thinking, and then also, how he experienced racism throughout his life. So yeah, it's much more personal. Yeah.
And if you have someone in your life who is younger, they redid Stamped from the Beginning for young adult audiences. Dr. Kendi and Jason Reynolds adapted it. So if anyone needs a gift idea for like a kid or a nephew or whatever,
I'm curious how they did it, because there's so much in this book, and I know the YA book is much shorter. So I think I will read it just to see how they adapted it. That's really interesting.
Yeah. But no, my last book, and I know we had talked about maybe me doing How to Be an Anti-Racist, but then I found out that Elijah Cummings had a memoir out, published posthumously, obviously, called We're Better Than This. And it literally is, the book ends as he dies. And
wow.
Yeah, so it's his childhood and his political career and his health struggles. And it's definitely a man who knows that he is not long for this world, and who is examining his legacy and what he's done and why. And then the last chapter is written by his widow. And they have excerpts from the eulogies given for him at his funeral. And I feel like my first two books showed me like, this is why I'm not a Republican. And this one was like, this is why I'm progressive. It's not just, this is why I don't believe what they believe. Like, this is why I believe what I believe. And it's, in the world that we live in, it's hard to see like one person making a difference, but Elijah Cummings was just one of the best people and a tireless force for good. And then, of course, this year we also lost John Lewis, who actually blurbed Elijah Cummings' book. So, but it's really, really good and so powerful. And there's he was the congressman for a good chunk of Maryland, including Baltimore, where I live. And there's a whole chapter on the president and his comments about Baltimore, which I don't really want to get into because I can't do it without swearing. So, but it's a love letter to politics and to making a difference and to fighting and showing up every day, but also to Baltimore, which is one of my favorite places in the entire world. So
Oh, I'll have to read that.
it's so good, like really, really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll put that on my to read list also. I also love Baltimore. I never lived there, but I visited. Good. All right, my last pick is fiction.
Yay.
It's a YA novel called The Voting Booth by Brandy Colbert. It is so cute. So it is about these two seniors in high school who it's election day and it's their first time voting. And it is so sweet.
My first time voting was the Bush Gore election.
Are you serious?
Oh man, what a way to start off your voting life.
My first vote was 2008.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a
mine was
better one.
2008 too.
Yeah. All right. So the main character's name is Marva, and she is super into politics. She has spent the last couple of years protesting and volunteering and getting people registered to vote, organizing, get out the vote kind of events, setting up rides for people to the polls. And it's finally November 3rd and she gets to go vote. So she gets up early, she goes to the polls as soon as they open, and she casts her ballot and she's so excited. As she's leaving, there's this other kid there, I say kid, they're both 18. That's kind of a kid. And he is trying to vote, but he's finding out that he's not registered to vote in the area that polling place is for. And he's trying to figure out why. He's been pre-registered since he was 16 because his family is also way into voting. But it turned out that, I guess they had used his dad's address instead of his mom's address. And so she sees him like kind of getting this hard time with getting his ballot, and she walks up, she's like, what's going on here? She's like, why can't you let this young man vote? And it just sends them on this day-long journey where they're trying to find out where he's registered, where his polling location is, what's happening. And she's driving him around, and amongst all this, a bunch of funny things happen. Like, she has a cat that's internet famous that she has an Instagram for, and the cat goes missing. So they're trying to find, organize the search party for the cat and all these things. And it's such a great book. It's so at times lighthearted and at other times very serious. Like, both the kids are people of color, and there are a couple of kind of upsetting scenes involving police stopping them in a traffic stop. And so you kind of get that like, ooh, feeling, but it's overall, the book is just, I can't say how much I love it enough. It's so good. I recommend. It just gives you a lot of hope. I mean, definitely this younger generation right now gives me a lot of hope for sure.
That's just what I was going to say. The one thing I'm really excited about for this election is how many young people have turned out to vote, and how many people in general have already voted is really encouraging. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, as of yesterday, Texas had already matched everyone who showed up to vote in 2016.
Right.
Wow.
And it's,
so cool.
Yeah, and we are on pace for a record-setting turnout.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
We'll see.
Yep.
Great. Yeah. So that's all of our picks, you guys. We did it.
Does everyone feel better? Do we feel still anxious?
I think I still feel anxious, but it was fun to talk about books for a little while.
It was, yeah. I have a lot of books now to read. This was great. Thanks for joining us, Jeff.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks. Definitely, thanks for having me. I was thinking maybe you should not have done political books like before the election, because people
But
might
we
be
thought
like,
we're
sort
like,
of tuning out.
right, what a great idea to do this on election day. But yes, I think it's important though to put some of these kinds of books in your rotation so people can be informed, and because I feel like there's headlines all the time, right? And there's this 24-hour news cycle that we're always being fed, and I think a book about some of these topics gives you a deeper dive and more background and helps you think a little bit more deeply about certain things. So I think it's
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I mean, one of the things I find frustrating often looking at the media landscape, and this is sort of me speaking, I guess, as a political scientist now, is like so little of what we talk about in politics, in sort of the national conversation, is about actual governance.
Mhm.
Like there's so little discussion of like how the government actually works and like how people actually do things. So much of it is just like these sort of personality politics, which
Right.
is important in a way. But yeah, I think it's super important to, get some of these books in, get an sort of broader understanding of what's going on beneath the surface.
Yeah,
Mhm.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Definitely agree. Great. Well, thanks again for joining us, Jeff. And thanks everybody for listening. You can follow us on social media at WYSR_podcast on Instagram and on Twitter. You can email us at whatyoushouldreadpodcast@gmail.com and look us up on Goodreads. I'll have a shelf with all of the books from today's episode so you can look them up. And yeah, just thanks for tuning in.
And if you haven't voted already, today is election day, so go vote.
Yeah.
Before the polls close. And
And if you're in line, they have to let you vote.
Yes.
there you go. They have to
And
let
you can listen to this podcast while you are waiting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be a longer one, so it'll be perfect.
Yeah. Perfect.
And yeah, now you know what you should read.
You're welcome.